Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of our Voices for Change series. Today's topic of discussion is lack of Canadian experience being a barrier to immigrant integration in the GTA. Research suggests that employers' preference for Canadian experience continues to be the biggest barrier for immigrants to find a job in their field. In today's episode, we will explore why this problem persists and how to address it. My name is Preet Kiran Sandhu. I'm a manager of employer and stakeholder relations at TRIAC and a racialized immigrant woman. To share their insights on this very important issue, we have Magdalene Kuhlman and Jessica Borland. Welcome to the podcast, Magdalene and Jessica. It's a pleasure to have you both here. And before we begin, I'd like you to introduce yourself to our audience. We can start with you, Jessica, and then move to Magdalene.
Okay, thanks, Preet. My name is Jessica Borland. I am the manager of the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Division within Randstad Canada. And with that, I have the opportunity to get in front of many organizations and talk to them about their recruitment practices and how they can help recruit more diversity into their organization, but not just bring it into their organization. How do they create the welcome environments to help retain those employees? So really excited to be a part of this conversation today. In my previous work with Randstad, I worked a lot with community partnerships and trying to find those connections between individuals through community partners looking for work and Randstad's employment. And the barriers that keep coming up were within those organizational spaces. So I think this is a really important discussion. So definitely excited to be here today.
Thank you, Jessica. Magdalene, move
Hi,
forward
Preet.
with your introduction. Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I am in great admiration for the work that you're doing in the space and having the opportunity to be here. So my name is Magdalene Kuhlman, and I am a Senior Research Associate with the Conference Board of Canada in the Immigration Knowledge area. Prior to this, I worked as a senior director with the World Skills Employment Center. And over the last 20 years, my work has been solely dedicated towards supporting newcomers to gain entry into the labor market and also working with employers to help remove some of the barriers which newcomers face in gaining access to employment. So I'm happy to be here. Jessica, good to see you again as well. Thank you.
Great. I'm really grateful and thankful for both of you to kind of join this podcast because it's such an important topic and I really value both your insights and experience. So I'll just start by reviewing the facts here. Canada has a point system designed to select highly skilled immigrants on factors that are presumed to give them an advantage in the labor market. But on arrival, these same immigrants struggle to find work in their fields. In a recent study conducted by TRIAC, immigrant women in the Greater Toronto Area identified an employer asked for Canadian experience as a major barrier to finding a job in their field. And as a result, nearly 2 in 3 immigrant women opted to downgrade their credentials to get their foot in the door at lower level positions than they were qualified for. Many also opted to pursue further studies, in part to compensate for a lack of Canadian experience. And the issue goes beyond just regulated professions. Even women working in IT and marketing explained how employers do not believe that a person from another country will understand the Canadian workplace culture. So this leaves newcomers in a difficult position. They do not get jobs because of a lack of Canadian experience, and they do not have Canadian experience because employers won't hire them. So I'd just like us to unpack this Canadian experience ask first. So what is meant by Canadian experience anyway? What are employers looking for? Is it specific know-how? Is it communication skills? Is it soft skills? What is it? So I think I'll start with you, Jessica, first, and then we'll move to Magdalene.
So what is Canadian experience? I think that's such an interesting question. I love asking that question when people tell me that it's a requirement. I think a lot of the times organizations are looking at their thought process of they're looking for Canadian experience But what they're really looking for is, and I'm just going to kind of call it out there, is Western experience. They don't ask
Okay.
someone who's just moved from the US, what's your Canadian work experience? Someone who has been educated and employed in the UK or in Australia, they don't ask those same questions. The skills and background of the experience is looked at differently. So when it comes to Canadian experience, I think it's a stigma that is generated within organizations. I think honestly, a lot of people don't even know where it started. I like to think the best of people's intentions, and then find out the rest later. But I think a lot of the times it's just an overall understanding that we require Canadian experience. And then, yes, it does come down to communication skills, Canadian work culture knowledge, I guess.
Okay.
And then I'm sure we'll get to it in a little bit more detail, but just general understanding of the Canadian landscape. But that I think that's kind of what encompasses Canadian experience from an organizational perspective. Whether that's right or wrong is up for further debate, I'm sure, throughout this conversation. But that's, I guess, how I would define it from their perspective.
Okay. Sorry, before we jump to you, Magdalene, you started with that employers ask you that they want Canadian experience. So is it out there? Because the following questions, I mean, is it being asked directly that they want someone with Canadian experience? I'm just a little shocked because I've seen it very in an implied manner in the job ads and in the recruitment process. And as an immigrant, I've faced it, but I never knew that this is going to be asked directly to recruiters, that they want someone with Canadian experience.
Oh, 100%. Definitely.
Okay.
That question has been, that's definitely been put out there. And we're still, I like to take it upon myself sometimes as a just side hobby of going into job descriptions and searching, like going on to Indeed or even onto sometimes our internal portals or anything where we're collecting job descriptions or job postings from organizations. And I will type in Canadian experience required and just see how many times it comes up.
Wow.
Because it's out there still blatantly,
Yeah.
even though I feel like we keep having this conversation as a society.
Yes. So Magdalene, what do you think about this? What is it when employers say that they want Canadian experience? What do they actually mean by it?
Well, first of all, I want to quote a report which was recently done by the Conference Board of Canada in trying to define what we mean by Canadian experience. And in this research, which was done by our knowledge area, it says that the Canadian experience is very poorly defined. And by that, it means that it refers to so many factors, but the research found out that there's no consistent and no coherent definition that brings those components together. So some people look at it as work experience in Canada. Some people are defining it as advanced language skills, including cultural use of language and occupation-specific language skills. Others are looking at it as the soft skills, the knowledge of the Canadian workplace culture. Others are looking at it professional and ethnic networks, personal networks, study experience in Canada, volunteering and unpaid work experience in Canada. So there's not one way of defining it, but how employers interpret what do you mean by Canadian experience, I think also runs across what I consider the continuum from an application process for a job to eventually being selected for the job. And if I must say, Preet, over the last 20 years, I came to Canada in 2003. And I remember when I arrived here, almost everyone said to me, you needed to have Canadian experience. And I kept on asking, what is that? Well, how does one get Canadian experience if you don't have Canadian experience? And even back then, it was a huge discussion between employers in the settlement sector and new immigrants themselves. And one of the things that came out of that conversation was that employers back then in 2020 actually eradicated or eliminated newcomers' resumes from the start of an application process only because they had a strange last name, a name
my
they could not
God.
identify. And just for that reason, newcomers' resumes were not being screened into the process. And the advice back 20 years ago, we newcomers were told, change your last name to an English name, so at least your name would be recognized. And also, they got discriminated against education. If education was not within a Canadian context, then the resume was not screened in. So I came to Canada as an internationally educated educator. My background was a primary school teacher, a special education teacher, and a school principal. Yet I could not teach here because I did not have the license to teach. However, as a new immigrant, I found myself in a position where I had to choose whether I went back to teaching or whether I use my skills in a different way. And what really made helped me make the choice, it was about finance. I did not have the money to go back to school for another 2 years to get my license to teach because I needed to take care of my family. And I think I am not the only one who's in that situation, which is why we question whether as well can go with the investment that newcomers have to make in getting more education in Canada. But as we can see today from the Conference Board and the research we have been doing in immigration, even international students who have Canadian experience are also being screened out of jobs. Right? So what exactly Canadian experience means, it's not coherent. There's not a standard description to say, these are the 3 boxes that means. So it's very different. So when I look back at that experience, I think Canada lost a great teacher by me not being able to go back into teaching. And I also lost a lot because I had to create a new career for myself. I earned a lot less than I probably would have made had I gone back into teaching. And at the end of the day, it has taken me many years to organize my profession in a way that I can earn at a commensurate level to another Canadian-born person. And that process, Britt, it took me 10 years to get myself at a commensurate level to another Canadian who had my same qualification and same experience, considering I had to also leave the teaching profession and get myself organized in an entire new career path. Right? So the thing about the reassessing and evaluating a person's credential when they come to Canada, it's a very important topic for discussion for policymakers, because if newcomers' experiences are not recognized, Canada loses on this big time. And Statistics Canada have published over and over so many reports that shows the underutilization of immigrant talent is actually a loss of billions of dollars to the Canadian economy.
It's so sad, the name idea, what really happened. It still happens today. We are still told to kind of tweak our names, to reduce it, to shorten it, to have in brackets an English sounding name so that it's easier for employers to refer to us. But I'll talk about this recruitment process that we're kind of dissecting here. So as immigrants, we really try our best to get past this ask. And I know that some immigrant folks remove even the location of work in their resumes to just kind of stay away from the recruiter or the hiring manager focusing on where they're from or have any questions related to their non-Canadian work experience. And because the ask can be so covert, it becomes difficult for immigrants to pinpoint it. So where do you think and how do you think does it manifest in the recruitment process? At what stages? Is it the job ad, the first screening criteria towards the end? I just want to understand at what stage does this manifest in the recruitment process. So we'll start with you, Jessica, first, because you have direct, extensive experience related to this.
I think it starts with the hiring managers who are creating the job posting. Like before any new immigrant would even have the opportunity to view that this position existed and was open, this Canadian experience bias, we'll call it, it's already in the system. And depending on the organization, there's so many factors, to Magdalene's point, there's no clear, like, this is the pinpointed moment when this has happened. So we can just remove that and we're good. We fixed the problem. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's not like that. So, but the bias and this idea, whether it looks one way or another or organization dependent, it exists before that job posting ever comes out. Those processes and those stigmas and those barriers are already in place in that organization, and organizations need to intentionally do the work to remove them.
What do you have to say to this, Magdalene? Do you want to?
I agree with Jessica 100%, especially when she says the barriers exist even before the job posting goes up. However, I want to mention that when I look at my own trajectory and the experiences of newcomers and employers in the market, and I want to make special reference to Ottawa because that's where most of my work has been, I can very clearly see how we're experiencing less and less of this in Ottawa, the barrier around Canadian experience. And a big part of it has to do with three factors. So one, I think employers in Ottawa in particular have been educated through many, many, many different formats, including the work which Hire Immigrants Ottawa does and World Skills Employment Center and OCISO in creating conversations and opportunities with employers so that they can better understand the newcomers' experience. So to Jessica's point about this needs to be in place even before a job posting goes up, because think about it. If the people who work in the organization have an appreciation and an experience for newcomers coming into Canada, into Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver, wherever they may be, to support in Canada's economic benefits in terms of having enough people to fill in the labor market needs, then in that case, they will always be supportive of immigrant talent even before the job posting goes up. So therefore, when the job posting goes up, that's what I would call that foundation has already been built. And Jessica, you mentioned earlier about still seeing Canadian work experience being a requirement on job descriptions. I am really surprised that this is still happening because according to the Canadian Human Rights Codes, the Ontario Human Rights Codes, this should be eliminated. It's actually illegal to even have it there, right? So I'm going to go back to my point, Preet. So I think employers in Ottawa are better educated about the newcomer talent pool, and therefore that foundation is built. The second piece I think that has been built, it's the piece on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think today we are seeing more organizations have a greater thrust on ensuring that the organizations are well represented in that realm. And because of that, I think it gives more newcomers the opportunity to go through this door. The third factor that is impacting on the recruitment and how that's done, it's the labor market needs. when there are high labor market needs in any one community, in any one country, I think employers have less options. So, for example, maybe 20 years ago, they had so many options to choose between Canadian, non-Canadian. Today, the immigrant talent pool is a very important talent pool in supporting employers to do the work. So Canadian experience from that perspective becomes less of a thing. I'm not saying it's not a thing anymore, but it becomes less of a thing because there's a smaller number of applicants to choose from.
So there's still a need for a shift in mindset, to be open, to understand what immigrants bring with them in terms of skills, experiences, and knowledge. And let's say we take the third point, and then we say that, okay, since there are less options and there will be chances that immigrants will get hired, I feel like there could be a problem in terms of retention and the culture within that organization, because then there is a problem of career advancement and general bias towards a newcomer employee. This is something that I felt, but I've even heard. I'm going to dig further into understanding what Canadian experience is. We've heard that employers switch to the term cultural fit to replace Canadian experience, and this is also a loaded term and it implies bias. What do you have to say about this?
Okay, so again, I want to step back a little bit, Prit, and I think that immigrant recruitment for employers, sometimes employers tend to view Canadian work experience as a predictor of success. Right.
Yeah.
And whatever that means for them, as we say, it's not consistent. However, there's, again, very limited evidence onto whether and why candidates with this experience are successful. So let's look at the continuum for employment from the application process. So what makes one gets chosen or not chosen? And Jessica, maybe I know Prit has asked me the question, but I'm going to throw the question for you. So what happens at that just first initial stage?
It's such a hard question. And I don't think there's a singular answer, because to the point, none of this is consistent. So what happens at that initial stage when those decisions are being made, or those applications are being made, or any of this, I think it just comes from it being a habitual, and right back to Preet's point, a habitual look in for that fit. There's an idea that you have to have the same backgrounds and the same experiences in order to fit into that workplace environment. And I think I've mentioned this on calls with Preet before, but when we talk about fit in the workplace, I refer to fit in recruitment as the F word of recruitment. It's this consistent desire to find more of the same. When what we should be looking for is differences to help us innovate our businesses, diversity of thought to help bring in these new ideas and new concepts. Because if we keep looking for more of the same, we're going to keep getting the same. We're not going to get different results. So yeah, this idea of finding people to fit in with the environment, or fit in with the culture, or fit in with the team, you should be looking for people who are going to add to your team and add to the culture and expand your horizon and expand your markets. And as organizations, I'm pretty sure that's what we all want to do. We want to do better. We want to do more, and we want to reach more markets, and we want to reach more people. Adding diversity into the mix and new perspectives, that's the only way you're going to get there.
Okay, so I want to continue adding on to Jessica. Thank you so much for providing that context. A few years ago, Preet, I learned that hiring managers tend to hire people who are similar to themselves. And that, I think, it's one of the things that happen at the very early stages, which is why it is so important when we are talking about fit to ensure that our recruiters and hiring managers, employers, people in the hiring capacity have knowledge of unconscious biases, and that they are very aware of how their own biases could have an impact on the type of decisions that they make when they hire other people. And I want to make a point here as well regarding social media and applications. So in another study that I did on looking at the role of social networking sites with employers and newcomers, I learned that employers use social networking sites to do a check on the applicant even before they call the applicant for an interview. That is a trend that is growing and which may or may not work in the interest of the newcomer. So, before social media, people applied with a resume and they have their names, and sometimes they were advised to put an English name on it and all that to help them become more Canadianized in a way. Today with social media, that does not exist. When you go on someone's social networking profile, you find out everything about them, their country, their origin, the color of the skin. These are things that you would not find on a resume before. So at the very start of the recruitment process, hiring managers, people in authority of deciding who comes into who gets selected, they have access to a person's information, which, if they are not aware of the conscious or unconscious biases, could lead into making decisions that could impact the individual.
So I understand that employers have trust issues, and that is working at a disadvantage, not only to the immigrant, but the employer as well, because we have those shortages. So this report that you mentioned, Magdalene, by the Conference Board of Canada, the Canadian Experience Disconnect, it states that the Canadian experience requirement can also act as a cover for discrimination against foreignness. And I just want to understand, what do you think is the reason behind employers making this ask in the first place? I know there's bias, but why? What in your, why is this ask being made in the first place? And I'll keep it open, whoever wants to take this first. I think Magdalene, yes.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's just fear. It's people not knowing what they don't know, right? So I'll give you a good example. A few years ago, I worked with Business Development Canada. And one of the things that they did is that they did an investigation into universities where newcomers were coming from across the globe. And the reason that they did that was to help their recruiters understand that it's not strange to understand that the education that our newcomers have received in some other parts of the globe is very much equivalent to the same courses and education that they would have received in a Canadian institution. And the reason that BDC did this many years ago was to alleviate the fear that recruiters and the team had around hiring newcomers. Sometimes when we don't understand something, we don't understand international education, it could lead us to believing that that international education is not the same as Canadian education. But as we can see from the Conference Board's report on the Canadian Experience Disconnect, Canadian experience itself does not necessarily mean it provides the experience that the employer is looking for, because even people with Canadian experience education often also gets eliminated out of competitions. Okay, so to answer your question, I think it's not knowing, it's the fear of the unknown that makes people make decisions about eliminating certain groups of people from the opportunities here.
Jessica, do you have anything to add to that?
I would agree completely. It's the lack of understanding of global education, global experience, and global markets. And it's just you don't know what you don't know kind of situation. And when consistently, to Magdalene's point from earlier, there used to be this opportunity to just select the one with Canadian experience. You would have the two on your desk and you could just pick. Like, that's just how businesses worked. So it was always, whether that was not maybe correct, but it was the option that they were able to take. And so it's always worked. I guess I'm doing quotes on a podcast, you can't tell, but it's always worked in one way or another to consistently hire that same type of individual. So now that employers and organizations are having to really look at something different, the fear is that that's not going to work.
Yeah. And I understand there are lots of costs involved with like hiring and retaining people. So they want to be mindful of that big decision. But I think there is a lot of work to be done in understanding what immigrants bring to the table. So there is a sense that some employers see less value in international work experience as compared to Canadian work experience. And we might have covered this, but are there certain occupations that do require local market know-how? Now, I very conveniently replaced Canadian experience with local market know-how in this question. So, because this is what I've heard from some employers, and I just want to understand if there are certain occupations that need that Canadian market knowledge.
So, I mean, there are certain positions where you require Canadian certifications, knowledge of codes. For example, if you're going to be working in any type of infrastructure, you should know the local building codes and policies, but you don't need to be Canadian to know those things. So yes, there are certain times where you require Canadian know-how, but you don't need to be Canadian to have, or have even lived in this country to have gained that knowledge. And I think that's an extremely important differentiator there.
Yeah, I agree with Jessica 100%. You don't need to live in the country to know Canadian know-how. And that takes us to another question that has to do with onboarding and how employers attract people to their workplaces. So let us take a look at professions such as doctors, engineers, veterinarians, teachers, lawyers. All of these require licensing. And the thing is, it can take many years, Preet. You're looking at 3 to 5 years of investment to get those licenses. The question I want to ask of employers and people in the regulatory bodies, do immigrants need to go through 3 to 5 years of learning that? Can it be done in a shorter length of time? Can it be done before they arrive in Canada, where some of these processes begin? And in terms of the know-how, I have appreciation for professions and the regulations. So, for example, if you look at engineering and my own experience working with engineers, I would say that there are things that are different here in the engineering profession, for example, codes and safety regulations, then that might exist in another country. And for that reason, it's important for all immigrants who are in a particular profession to understand how the sector works in Canada. That's important. And that, I think, is a responsibility for the licensing and credential bodies, and for employers to ask themselves, when they write a job description, are they asking for needs or wants? They might
Mm.
want to have somebody who meets all these fancy requirements they have of, 5 years or 3 years of recent experience. But is it a need? Could that job be modified in a way that allows them to assess a person's experience and to work and to also at the same time provide a proper onboarding and training program for this person so that this person becomes an asset to the organization? Because we certainly do not want our newcomers who are working in regulated bodies to fail on the job. We want them to succeed, but there's know-how in every country. And I think helping them to understand what it means in Canada is very important for their success.
Thank you for covering the on this very important point for of providing on good onboarding and on the job training as an opportunity, because I also in my experience feel that employers kind of refrain from this. They do not want to take the responsibility of training anybody on the job for, let's say, the first month or the first 3 months, and they want someone to just come and deliver and already have that knowledge. So maybe this is just out of my limited experience, but I want to also understand, do you think that there is it too costly to train? Is it why this resistance from employers to offer on better onboarding practices or on the job training as part of their hiring practices?
I think for sure it is a costly process. There is no doubt about it. And in a labor market where it's thriving and where you have access to talent and large pools of talent, I think one can say, you know what, I'll choose the person with the most experience, the person I don't have to train a lot, because, that helps me save some dollars. But in the tight labor market that we're in right now, it's a very important consideration for employers to ask, how can they onboard and bring people into their organizations and also have a plan for retention? Because in the long run, they are going to have a return on investment of this newcomer whom they will bring in and who will add a lot of value to their organizations. I think at this particular point in 2023, moving forward, employers do not have many options in choosing the talent, or else it will hold back their own businesses, right? So it's very important for them to think of a process that will attract and retain newcomer talent in their businesses.
Of course. Anything that you would like to add, Jessica, in your experience with employers and their onboarding techniques?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it goes across the board when it comes to onboarding anyone within your organization.
Mm-hmm.
The more value you can put on this person that you're onboarding into your organization, the more loyalty they are going to show to your organization. Offering upskilling and training and all of any type of employee well-being type of options to a newcomer who's starting with your business is only going to enhance the profitability of your business through that individual. This idea of we're not going to invest until someone has passed their probationary period. Well, you're going to see a lot of people not pass their probationary period because they're not going to feel like someone's invested in them. Why would they want to stay? But I think from obviously, I feel all organizations should have a solid onboarding process to help people be bought into the culture of their business. No longer, to Magdalene's point, we're not in an environment anymore where you get to say, candidates, please compete to be able to have the luxury of working for us. It's employers saying, here's how I can compete against the other organizations to have the luxury of you working for me. That's the market we are in. The power is in the hands of the people looking for work because there's less of them than we need right now.
Yes.
So, I mean, and this can open up a bigger conversation,
I,
to a topic I'm sure we're going to get to of, how really employers need to start looking at those talent pools.
yes, yes, that's exactly what I'm getting to. So the federal government plans to bring in 500,000 people, immigrants in 2025, and immigration is seen as a measure to kind of solve the labor market labor. So immigration is seen as a measure to solve the labor shortage problem. And I think that there is a responsibility here on part of the employer to find ways of recognizing immigrant skills and qualifications. So the question is, what can employers do to mitigate and minimize the Canadian experience ask? And I know in our chat, Jessica, you mentioned you have a checklist. And I'm just so curious to know more about this checklist that you have in place for employers.
Yeah. So the basic thing with employers is, for one, ask yourself as an employer, as a hiring manager, what is this Canadian experience that I think I need? Like, what am I looking for? I think we've talked about this 100 times already in this podcast, but what am I looking for when I say Canadian experience? Okay, is it communication? Okay, what am I looking for when I say I'm looking for someone with good communication? What does that mean? What is good communication? I can have a conversation with someone and say, I communicated perfectly fine with that person, and someone else can have a conversation and have a completely different outcome, verbal versus written versus presenting versus talking to laborers versus talking to CEOs. All of those are different forms of communication. So really, part of the checklist is breaking down with employers, what are you actually looking for? What skills and qualifications do you want this person to have? Not nice to have, not personality traits, not physical descriptions. What actual skills and qualifications are you looking for these individuals to have to make them the best person for the job? And it really comes down to asking yourself as an employer, who am I eliminating from my talent pools by asking this question in this way? Or who am I eliminating from my talent pools by including this qualifier? Because right now, the purpose should not be to minimize the amount of applications we are getting. It should be to open up our talent pools to as much diversity of talent as we possibly can, because that's the only way you're going to get the best.
That's so right. Magdalene, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I agree 100% with Jessica. And in addition to this, with the government bringing 500,000 people to Canada next year, I think it's very, very important for there to be policies that support the employment of these individuals and employers to increase their own understanding of that talent pool that is coming in Canada. So I foresee a big need for more education programs and more programs within communities that bridge immigrants with other people who are living in those communities, including employers. And why is that so important? There are studies that show that where an immigrant starts off his or her career in Canada very much determines how the trajectory is going to be. So, for example, if I started my career as a doctor, imagine I'm an internationally trained doctor, and I started my career working, delivering pizza, for example, my career trajectory would be very different and more difficult than the doctor who comes in and started their career in a health institution, maybe working, maybe not as a doctor, but in a field that is commensurate. So that first job for newcomers, it's very important. And the Canadian government need to consider who's coming in and how they are preparing employers to accept and to work with the newcomers who are coming into these different communities.
Yes, that's very true. That first job is really important, and it says a lot about our career trajectory. Um, At this, when we talk in your experience, Magdalene, I know that we spoke about this in our conversation earlier. You mentioned that Ottawa is doing a better job than other. I mean, in your experience with working with employers in Ottawa, I just wanted to know is what are employers doing correctly in Ottawa to solve this problem versus Toronto? So, what can employers from Toronto learn from employers from Ottawa? Let's put it like that.
Well, maybe let me qualify it and say again, it's in my experience, right? Because I have not worked with employees in Toronto, but I know there's a lot of amazing work that's also being done in Toronto. But I can share from Ottawa a few very amazing examples of work with employees. So, first of all, while I was working with the World Skills Employment Center, we realized that employers were not very well educated about our newcomer talent pool. And therefore, with the Hire Immigrants Ottawa, we started what we call working groups, where Hire Immigrants Ottawa brought employers together. And there were 33 employees, by the way, who formed what they call the Council of Champions, the Council of Champions. And what that council did was to bring those employees together to create a strategy for how employers could access immigrant talent. And through working with the World Skills Employment Center and the settlement agencies, we were able to develop what we call a one-stop shop, where if an employer is looking for talent, they could send World Skills their job description, and we would find the right talent to match with those opportunities. At the same time, we held many, many, many coaching and networking events where we would invite employees to come in and meet with our newcomer talent pool. And this shifted the dynamic in many ways because we addressed the fears and the concerns of employers. So we moved the continuum along in a positive way, in that employers were not only depending on a resume to know a newcomer, but we put them in spaces and places where they could meet these individuals personally, develop the connection, and they would realize, oh my goodness, these newcomers, they've got the education, they've got the language abilities, they've got the connections, they have almost everything that the employer would be looking for in their workplaces. Okay, so these connections are important. And another couple of strategies we used was mentorship. We developed a very strong mentorship program with TD Canada, where TD executives became mentors to our newcomers. And through this program, we've had over 70% success of these newcomers being matched directly to jobs at TD Canada, because the mentors had the experience to help guide the newcomer along that journey. We did the same thing with Accenture, which was excellent. Another program I want to draw your attention to is the Federal Internship for Newcomers program, which was first started with the federal government, World University Education Services, and World Skills. And what that program sought to do was to provide that experience, that work experience, to newcomers in the federal government so that they would be better prepared for work. And this program has now been running for about 10 years. And over 1,000 newcomers have been hired across 24 departments across Canada. And Preet, I want to go back to the point of that first job, that work experience. What we know for sure is that the newcomers who benefited from these internship opportunities, they went on to securing better government jobs, which provides greater compensation and greater opportunities for their progress in this society. So it was not only the Federal Internship for Newcomers program. We have a number of other small employers in the Ottawa area who have provided internship opportunities for our newcomers. And the last initiative that I want to talk about is what we call the Circle of Champions, which we did for visible minority newcomer women. I'm not sure whether you are aware, but the statistics show that visible minority newcomer women are behind in access to the labor market and promotion in the labor market. And one of the ways we address this through a national research project called the Career Pathways for Visible Minority Newcomer Women, which is funded by IRCC, is to develop a circle of support by engaging civic participation, to be people who are professionals in our community, to be mentors to visible minority newcomer women. And through this engagement, we found that newcomer women actually accelerated in getting jobs, getting promoted, and also getting into the right job in the very first few months of being in Ottawa. So these are things I think that are very progressive. And what it does, it removes the biases and the discrimination, because people get to know each other as human beings, as people, not just learning or hearing about a newcomer, but getting to know a newcomer and also understanding how they can be assets to the workforce.
Yes, that sounds it's both sides, right? So the immigrants also get exposure to the local market and understand what the employer expectations are, and the employers understand what the immigrants can bring to the table. So it's both sides exposure that is required through these events, programs, meeting points, etc. And of course, the initial mindset of what are we really looking for is the main question to ask. I want to take a moment to kind of talk about the effects this might have on an immigrant. So I feel there is a need to set, we might have covered this, I think there is a need to set realistic expectations here so we immigrants can know how to address it in the application process. I'm going back to the application process because that's where most of this actually takes place. So we resort to different ways of proving our abilities and getting past this ask. Some of us take up volunteering work. We take up survival jobs. We pay from our pockets to get that training from a Canadian educational institute to prove that we have Canadian experience. And we start doubting our abilities, even though we have international experience and we've come to the country claiming those points during immigration. So all of these perpetuate newcomer underemployment, delayed labor market integration, not to mention the mental trauma that one goes through in this entire process. How can immigrants respond to the ask for Canadian experience in their job application? Is there anything that we can do in our application that will help us get the job, basically, is what I'm asking. So I'll start with you, Jessica, and then we'll move to Magdalene.
Yeah, so in the application process, I mean, I just want to preface, especially, I cannot speak from this from experience, being, born and raised in Canada. I do not have the same experience, but I can speak to it from having worked with so many organizations over the last few years through Randstad. So highlighting transferable skills can help, emphasize the skills and experience that you have. And obviously emphasize any experience that you've gained in your previous roles, even if they're not in Canada. So for example, if you worked in like a customer service role, you can talk about your experience, obviously serving customers with conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is conflict resolution, regardless of the country that you are in. Teamwork is teamwork. A lot of those transferable skills are, again, skills-based, not wherever location-based. And then showcase any type of adaptability. So anytime that you have had to adapt to any type of situation in most employment spaces are ever changing in some way or another. Even if it's not in an employment space, adaptability, even having obviously immigrated from one country another, there's a certain amount of adaptability just in that process that you have gained, showcasing those skills and being able to adapt to new scenarios. That can be that can showcase very valuable skill set to an employer, and also mitigate some of that potentially unfounded fear that someone might not be able to adapt or fit in, or whatever words they want to use for their to their work environment.
Okay, that's very helpful. Magdalene, is there anything that you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, so I want to make a couple of points here in the interest of the newcomer and the importance of empowering themselves to understand the needs of the employer. At the end of the day, I believe that every employer is trying to hire the best person to have a return on the investment, to grow the company, and to make sure that that person is competent in fulfilling the job. And therefore, for the newcomer, it's very important for them to take the time for them to research and understand the employer needs, and in the application process to very clearly articulate how they have the experience that meets those needs. Having said that, Preet, I also know that the formal application process is only one way of getting a job in Canada. And it's not the only way. There are many paths to finding a job. One includes helping newcomers understand how to network and to increase their networking skills. I have seen so many people in my career get jobs through the network, not through a formal application. And what happens through the network, they are better able to articulate sometimes what they have done in person rather than only on a resume. The second thing is helping newcomers to get involved in groups and discussions that are at commensurate level to where they left off in their home countries. I had a recent experience of a newcomer who said to me, she's very highly skilled, master's degree from the US. And when she arrived in Canada, she applied for a very medial job, and the employer said to her, that's about all you'll be able to do here because you don't have any experience. And she said, I don't understand this. I'm coming here with a master's degree in health from a US university, and this employer would not budge. But the newcomer was empowered enough, and she said, you know what? I don't have to take this job. I am going to keep on applying and applying until I find the right job. And she did this. And today she is almost like a manager with another organization, which means that another company recognized her skills. Having the conversation with newcomers to overcome that ask of Canadian experience is a very important thing, Preet. We need, as newcomers, to know our worth, our value, to know where we stand. And sometimes what it takes is to hold out a bit before you choose the first job that comes your way, or before you just simply believe that Canadian experience is so valued that you would get into any job. Because if you do that, you might be exploiting yourself or putting yourself in a position where the employer will exploit your skills. And to that effect, I also want to mention for newcomers that we sometimes think that volunteering, for example, will help us get that Canadian experience we're looking for. Sometimes it may work, but sometimes it may actually work against us. So I've met newcomers who have gone on volunteering in offices, for example, and within that office, they have had the opportunity to network and to get themselves in a better position. But I have also seen newcomers who have volunteered and have stayed in a volunteering role for like 3 years, and the company never provided a better opportunity for them. And again, newcomers need to educate themselves to say, how much volunteering should I do? Should I do this to learn a skill, to gain more networks? Should I do this to stay there for 3 years and be exploited? That's not acceptable. So the onus of this Canadian experience is not only on the side of the employer, it's also for the newcomer to understand what is being asked, empower themselves with the skill and knowledge so that they can defend themselves against any type of exploitation.
Thank you. This is very valuable. It's basically saying don't settle for less, but at least find out what's required and build a confident case for yourself and really use the language of skills. That I think is being as objective as you can about your own experience and how you project yourself. So that's a great way to move forward with this. I'll we Magdalene, you mentioned about this particular thing earlier in the conversation, but I'll come to this now. Back in 2013, the Ontario Human Rights Commission issued a policy articulating how evaluating job candidates based on Canadian experience can be discriminatory. And the Working for Workers Act 2021 removes the Canadian experience requirement for regulated professions and trades outside of the health sector. But we are still talking about this problem. So I want to know what new or additional policy actions would help reduce or eliminate the Canadian experience barrier. So we'll start with you, Magdalene, and then we'll move to you, Jessica.
Okay, so the thing with the Canadian experience barrier and the human rights code is that we cannot prevent employers from making the decisions that they make. They don't have to say they did not hire someone because the person did not have Canadian experience, because if they did that and they explicitly told the newcomer this, the newcomer has the right to take them to court to task them on this because it's illegal in Ontario. Having said that, Jessica, what else can we do with employees? Education, I think continues to be the key in employers investing in diversity, equity, inclusion training. And we have seen an increase in this over the last 5 years. I can guarantee you, I have spoken at so many workshops that deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we need more of it, more to remove the systemic barriers, more to help employees understand their own processes in their organization, and to even look at the leadership levels, because sometimes if the leaders in the organization do not take a strong affirmative action to say that newcomers are welcome here, we are going to adjust our policies to make sure that our organization is diverse. If the leaders do not create equitable working conditions for all employees, including newcomers, then these changes are not going to be made. However, I'm working on a project now that includes several settlement organizations, and some of them are out in the rural communities. I can also see that a case needs to be made to ensure that employers and small, medium-sized businesses who do not always have the capacity for them to invest in huge amounts of training and onboarding, that government pays attention to small, medium-sized businesses to ensure that they have the support that they need to understand the newcomer population and to understand the practices that must be put in place to support them in working in these different organizations.
Wow. Anything that you'd want to add to this, Jessica? I mean, in your role, is there anything that you all are mindful of at Randstad Canada with regards to newcomer recruitment?
I mean, absolutely. So in my role, my division has actually developed trainings and workshops specifically to address these biases in the workplace. And we were intentional in the development of these workshops to speak to the business mindset of the individual. There are many different, to Magdalene's point, many different unconscious bias trainings, EDI&A trainings. There are countless trainings out there. And a lot of them focus on this is the right thing to do side of things. This is how we should treat people, which all obviously very, very valid and very good points. However, if you're speaking to senior leaders in business and you want to shift change in their organization, they should and probably already know it's the right thing to do, but their mind is going to be focused on what's the right thing for my business.
Yeah.
So we have developed these workshops and trainings specifically for leaders on how to shift the mindset and the culture of your business to be open to diversity, to be open to diversity of thought, to understand the importance of hiring newcomers and, the growth of the newcomer population, and the entire intention behind a lot of the programs bringing immigrants into the country to fill these roles. Like, the skills are intentionally being brought into the country to deal with the issues that companies are saying that they have, but the company is still putting this barrier in place. So our workshops are specifically designed to help organizations see the business perspective and see how it can affect their business from a profitability standpoint, from an employee retention standpoint, and from an employee engagement standpoint, so that they can build a better business model. And that way we are affecting it from the top. And then the trickle down effect is going to go all the way down to your base level employees, because that is the standard that is being set by this business. That being said, this is not a fast process. It is slow because you have to do it right. There's nothing about diversity or inclusion or equity or the accessibility. Nothing about that is a one-stop shop fix. You have to be intentional. Organizations have to say to themselves, I want to do better. And that's the only way that they're going to do better. And then on Magdalene's point of saying that equitable changes and policies need to be put in place, I think that is so important. So many organizations are looking at, how do we create equal policies for everyone? How do we make everything equal? That's not how it's going to work. New immigrants are going to have different needs than Canadian-born employees, and that is just a fact. The same as someone with a disability is going to have different needs than someone without a disability. We need to create equitable processes and policies within our organizations so that everyone can come to work, be their best true self, and offer everything that they have to the organization so that organization can benefit from all of that knowledge.
Wow, thank you. I think there is a lot of, it sounds hopeful to me, because I started off with, why is this barrier there in the first place? But this is really, really hopeful to know that a lot of organizations are out there. I know in my existing role as well with employer relations, there is definitely a need for, I've heard employers even asking that, we do want to hire, but first we'd like to kind of educate ourselves on how to be around newcomer talent. So there is a need to, there is a slight openness and acceptance to these trainings. And that's really encouraging to know as a newcomer myself. But one other thing before I jump to the last question, I just wanted to check with you, Magdalene. So part of the recommendations from the report by the Conference Board of Canada on Canadian Experience Disconnect, it's one of the recommendations was there is a need to review settlement practices to gather data on the impact of specific employment-related services. So this is me talking about the bridging programs out there. Is
Mhm.
is there, do you think that there is a need to understand and validate what forms of Canadian experience training leads to immigrants getting hired or no? So what I'm trying to ask here is whether these trainings try to actually bridge that knowledge gap and get past that ask. What do you have to say
Mhm.
about this?
In my experience with bridge training programs, I think a lot of them have been very successful. And it's not about, I don't want to say that it's about a Canadian experience as much
Hmm.
as it's about know how of how things work. And for the newcomers who access those bridging programs, I have heard very complimentary things from them to say, thanks to the Canadian government for giving us the opportunity to learn about how things are done. And it actually sets a more successful trajectory into their careers because the bridging training programs in most cases they don't only come with content, they also come with other things like helping newcomers understand how to tailor their resumes for some of these jobs. It helps them to understand the different types of job in a particular sector that they can do. One thing I have realized over the years of working with newcomers is that sometimes the way that they present themselves to an employer may not always be the best way because there are lots of cultural nuances in it as well. So the bridging programs help them to understand the requirements of jobs within a particular sector, and it helps them to position themselves for success. So yes, I will say that bridging programs are really important. I think that they should be part of the settlement services. I think IRCC needs to continue investing in them and maybe more research needs to be done to see which ones of them are probably more successful than others, or whether the curriculum for some of these bridging programs need to change. But overall, it's a good thing to have bridging programs.
Great, great, great. Yes, I've been part of these bridging programs and I did run a few myself, and I see that it really helps understand and get that information that we need as newcomers in a new country. So that's helpful to know. I'm
Preet,
just
sorry.
winding. Yes.
Can I add to that really quick? As someone who has
Yes.
worked with, from an employer standpoint, with many different organizations who run similar programs, again, this data is from Alberta because this is where I ran this pilot program in partnering with strategic partners in order to generate talent for Randstad positions. Between 2018 and 2020, we were able to place 208 newcomers into placements who came out of these programs. The retention rates were about double our typical retention rates. And again, we place people into a lot of contract positions. The amount of individuals who rolled over from contract into full-time positions was triple the amount of our typical not through these program placements. So I literally have
Wow.
statistics from our
Yeah.
own pilot project to prove that the newcomers that came through these programs, but it not only worked, but it worked because as an organization, we intentionally went and engaged with these programs in order to assist these newcomers into finding positions. So from a business standpoint,
Wow.
it is so
Mhm.
important to understand that these programs exist and they're literally pools of talent just waiting for
Mhm.
jobs. So as an employer, it just makes so much sense to engage with these organizations and engage with individuals in these programs. But then on the flip side, Magdalene, you'd said, from a cultural standpoint, it's important to learn how to kind of introduce yourselves into a
Mhm.
business. Part of our trainings as well to leaders is, from a cultural standpoint, you need to understand that not everyone is like you.
Yeah.
So when you're speaking to someone and when you're interviewing someone and you're like, oh, that's a red flag, employers and hiring managers need to reflect and say, is that a red flag, or is that just
Uh-huh.
something I don't understand?
Mhm.
So I remember back in the day when we used to actually sit in offices and see people, you know, you'd go to shake someone's hand, as is super typical in a Western environment. It's not comfort for everyone, but it's not
Mhm.
comfortable for everyone, not just because of cultural differences, for a variety of reasons. Is that really a
Mhm.
reason to not hire someone?
Yeah.
You know, so really, I understand there's this, let's get newcomers educated, I guess, and give them some know-how of the Canadian norms. But that onus also falls on organizations to understand that we live in a country that is extremely diverse. We cannot have one way of looking at things or thinking of things. According to the most recent census data, there's over 100 different cultural backgrounds represented in Canada. No one can be expected to know all of them, but you need to know that they all exist so that you can, again, check yourself. Is this a legitimate red flag, or am I just not understanding this form of communication?
And I want to
Wow, that's
build a
so
little
great to
bit
know.
more on what Jessica
Yes.
has said. We have as well a lot of success stories in Ottawa with our newcomers who have attended a bridge training program, or where we have partnership with employers who come repeatedly back to us to hire more and more newcomers. I want to draw attention to the Empowering Visible Minority Newcomer Women's Initiative in Ottawa, which I mentioned before is part of the national pilot project, Career Pathways for Visible Minority Newcomer Women. I asked newcomer women who came into that program, and I have worked with over 1,000 of them over the last 3 years. And my question on day one, I say, what do you think is your barrier in finding employment? And 99% of these women have responded with answers like, I don't have a network. I don't understand what is required of me. I have lost my confidence. I don't understand the job market here. A lot of these responses makes me realize that when we transition from one country to another, in ourselves, we feel that there is a gap, which is why settlement organizations are so important in helping newcomers rebuild their confidence to say that the transition has happened. You are in a new country. Yes, you need to learn all these things, but you have skills. And these skills are transferable, and we must help them to empower themselves to know that it's not the transition. The transitioning is difficult. We understand that, but it should not take away the entire self-esteem and self-concept and lack confidence. So what we have found with this program, it's very engaging with employees as well who come in our classrooms, industry experts who meet these women, who talk to them and so on. By the end of 2 weeks of training and empowerment, 99% of the women come back at the end of the program to say to us, oh my God, I feel so empowered. I'm so confident. I can get a job. And Preet, you will not believe it. The women go on to moving from no self-confidence to boosting confidence. And the next thing we know, they are working in a management position because they have been able to go out there and represent themselves. So to the thing around the Canadian experience and employees and what they can do more, I want to say that part of that responsibility is the employer. But the other part of the responsibility also lies in with the newcomer. And the bridging pieces between the employer and the newcomer, it could run anything from mentorship to settlement services to programs to bridging programs to just having conversations with newcomers. But what's important is that as a community, as a society, as Canada, as a country, we are empowering both sides to see the amazing opportunity where newcomers can contribute the talent and employers can actually benefit from the assets that newcomers are bringing to the country.
what I'm gathering from what both of you have said right now is it's just the term value that is coming in my head a lot. So, value of as an immigrant, how to understand your value, how to present your value, how to communicate that value, and for the employers to understand what is it that they are looking for in terms of that value add when they make when they are looking to hire people. So it's both coming together to understand each other's value in different ways. I think more conversations, more interaction, more exposure to each other will eliminate any lack of information and the risk, all of these things. So sounds really hopeful to me. And I think there is a lot of work that can be done. And I really, really hope that I don't have to do another podcast on this topic. But these are systemic changes. And because I totally understand it takes a long time for all of this work to be put into place, but at least there's a conversation going on, and I hope that there is more awareness out there with what both of you have said, and I genuinely appreciate all that you've shared in this podcast. Is there anything that you'd like to add, or Magdalene, Jessica, anything else, parting thoughts, any tips to employers, anything to newcomers?
I would say again, just to play off what you just said, Preet, on value. I think it's super important that any newcomer going into the workplace understand right off the bat what their rights are as a potential employee, what their rights are as an applicant, and stand strong with that. If you are asked, again, potentially overtly about your Canadian experience, ask the employer what they mean. Don't be afraid to say, what do you mean by Canadian experience? What are you looking for? You're going to get a lot of information in how they answer that about whether this is even an organization you want to work for. There are so many companies hiring and looking for skills right now. To Magdalene's point from earlier, you don't need to settle on the first offer. You don't need to settle on the first one to call you in. Find a place that is going to value you and your skills and your opinions and what you have to bring to the organization. Because that's your right as a human being and your right as an employee to be respected and valued in the workplace.
Thank
Could
you.
have said
Thank
it
you.
better, Jessica.
Yes.
And for me, two messages I want to leave, it's for employers to really invest in inclusive recruitment practices that embraces the newcomer talent pool. And to do that, it means that they may have to rethink of assessments. For example, how do you really assess a person's abilities to do the job that you want them to do? And so in addition to an interview, what else could be put in place to assure you that that person will be able to do the job? So that's one aspect of it. The second message I want to share with employers is that the investment in the newcomer talent pool needs to be across the entire organization, not just in one department. I have seen in some cases just one department understand this, but not the rest. And that investment should not only be at the hierarchical level in terms of just the policy or structure. It needs to be integrated in a way that the person at the very menial job in that organization to the top leader in that organization and everybody in between understand the value of immigrant talent in Canada. It's not just a myth. The bottom line is, for Canada to prosper, Canada needs immigrant talent. So when we all understand that, I think, and we all understand the weight that talent has on our social security in the future, I think we would have a better appreciation for the immigrant talent that's in the country today and the more that will continue to come. And my last message, Brit, is can we imagine a world where Canada loses on all this immigrant talent because it gets a bad reputation for people not working in their fields or people not being able to access the right level of jobs for their prosperity? So if employers do not change their hiring behaviors, if governments do not put proper policies in place to ensure that newcomers are coming in with very good prospects, the flip side of that is that we would have less immigrants coming to Canada, and other countries who are more advanced in these policies will be attracting these immigrants. So the implications of Canadian experience as a negative thing for not hiring newcomers, it goes beyond just the job. We're talking today about the prosperity of Canada as a country, this prosperity of newcomers who are coming here, and we can have both if we have a better appreciation and understanding of the talent pool that's bringing tremendous assets to Canadian employers.
That's a very valuable perspective to take on this entire discussion to see if Canada truly is diverse, and it's exciting destination for people out there to migrate to for their economic prosperity and all of these things. I'm sorry, I'm just at a loss of words because I'm thinking of the articles that I've been reading on this, and a lot of this is just me going back and thinking, because there was a recent study that said that Canadian citizenship rates had reduced among newcomers. Less and less people were becoming Canadian citizens. Okay, this may not be related, but thank you so much. Our viewers, our listeners have a lot to take away from this discussion that we had about the tips that you've shared, both for newcomers and for employers, and also the value of what the settlement sector brings into this entire discussion. I'm really grateful for both your time. It has been a pleasure to communicate with you both prior and during the podcast to get to know more of what you have to say about this. Thank you so very much. Once again, thank you, Jessica and Magdalene, for sharing your valuable insights and helping our listeners understand how to be more mindful of their biases when making hiring decisions. And also, I think this episode was reassuring for immigrants who bring valuable international experience to Canadian job market, knowing that employers are evolving in their hiring practices. Stay tuned for the next episode, and thank you for listening. If you like this episode, please like, share, and leave a review. And please tell us what you want to hear more from us. You can also follow us on Twitter at TRIEC, TRIEC, or on LinkedIn at Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council. Also, if you have an awesome story about your career journey as an immigrant, DEI strategies at your organization, we'd like to hear from you. Thanks for listening.